We're back with another episode of the Creating Connections podcast, where passions become professions. I'm your host, Elijah Moore, and today's guests are CoAC and Cole's professors, and we dive into the topic of game development and how these perspectives sort of supplement each other and how they differ. So hopefully they provide different views and perspectives of game development. Let's jump into the host introductions, or the introductions of the guests. So tell us about yourselves, who you are, your background, and how you're involved with Whitewater, UW-Whitewater.
Hi, my name's Brian Maresso. This is my 7th year teaching here at UW-Whitewater in the Department of Computer Science. I also work a lot with media arts and game development and cybersecurity as well. In terms of how I got here, I've always had a passion for computing technology, video games, interactive media, specifically around programming. I've done research with artificial intelligence and machine learning, but specifically towards building video games and creating virtual spaces. So that's my background and experience and what I do here at the university.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Nick Hwang. I'm in the College of Arts and Communication. I've been here since 2015, so 11 years now. My background is largely in music and interactivity, and that was my entry point into game making. And I teach a lot of courses in game development as well as the senior level capstone classes.
Awesome. And then you both enjoy playing games. But when did you both realize that games were something you wanted to professionally pursue?
I figured out that I wanted to work in video games around the time I was in middle school, so around 5th grade for me. I enjoyed playing games, of course, but I got really interested in the technical makeup of what actually made interactions happen. As it so happened, my father was a programmer, and not for video games or anything like that, old school assembly, but he was very supportive of that idea of digging into how computing technology worked, and thankfully he recognized that video games were a perfectly legitimate form of software engineering, and so he would let me use the computer, the single computer, as much as I wanted. And I used that to self-teach some programming. I went to the local library, checked out some books, and did as much as I could when there weren't a lot of resources on the internet. And after that, I realized that my passion was in specifically programming for games, and so continued doing that all throughout high school, college, and now even to this day, I'm still working on video games. So been doing that for a while, but still really enjoy it after all this time.
Great. My route into video games is sort of being shut out early on as a child and loving video games. One of the first consoles that we had as a family was the Nintendo, the first NES, and after overplaying it, my siblings and my parents returned it because they thought that we played it too much. And despite that, we still played a lot of video games growing up. And my interest into making games came about sort of circuitously, looking at ways to make music more interactive and exploring different types of systems or platforms that allow me to do that. And that sort of brought me into the world of game development.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then you both have very similar backgrounds, but Brian, how would you describe the CS side a person does when developing a game compared to the UX side, like the front end work?
So, I mean, I'm a big believer in game development being interdisciplinary. One side needs to be aware of the other and vice versa. But as far as how computer science is related to game development, we treat it like software. We tend to treat it more like a product. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. But we break it down like we would any other software engineering project. We try to plan out everything first. By the time we write code, it's a formality. We have all of our planning documentation all ready to go. But that also means being reactive to the needs of artists and sound engineers and writers and voice actors and all the other people that make games. And so that means that even the best laid plans for how something will be engineered might change. And that's why it's important to have folks with that software engineering background that would be familiar with like an agile workflow and being accepting of change rather than resistant to it. But really, we do treat it just like software from the computer science side of things, just a more interdisciplinary type of software than what a lot of folks would be used to at more of a traditional desktop application development environment. But the core principles are still all the same, just more interactive, more working with people that aren't engineers. And I think that's a really good thing for engineers and artists to do. But still just software at the end of the day for us.
Yeah. Awesome. And then Nick, is there a different approach in describing the UX side for a person when it comes to game development?
Yeah, I think if we're thinking about UX, for UX in games is largely a holistic approach to how you would treat the user or the person that might be approaching your game. And a lot of it is involved in the design of what you hope to have the player or the person that's playing experience the game. Maybe it involves almost everything, including a lot of the technical side of things as far as it's executed. So you might have goals that talk about having a pleasant experience or one that you have like a feeling attached to it. You want them to have a sense of warmth maybe, or the experience is chaotic, and all of those sort of bleed into the art or the way that the cutscenes might feel and the responsiveness of the controls. Those sorts of things touch every aspect of it, not just the look and the feel and the sound. And definitely influence the technical side of things.
Yeah. And then continuing on to that, have either of you encountered instances where there's a great game, at a great design and theory, but bad code or bad software underneath it, and vice versa?
Evaluating the code underneath it is a little hard because most companies will keep that as a very closely guarded secret, even if the code is bad. Hopefully we would never know. But that's actually a good point, because generally in any sort of software development, we try to follow the mantra of make it work first and make it work well later. And we can, as computer scientists, talk for hours about the efficiency of sorting algorithms and whether we're going to save some immeasurable amount of time by doing things one way or another. And ultimately it wouldn't matter. So I can't think of any games that are, I would say, poorly programmed that are otherwise a good game, for one reason, that you can't really make a complete game if it is not well programmed, just as you could not easily make a game that doesn't have viable art assets or anything like that, because it just simply wouldn't be something that would reach the consumer. I'm sure there are games like that out there, but it's not something that folks would be aware of. But then also at the same time, when there's passion being put into the project, that should touch all facets, even if somebody's not a particularly skilled programmer. I don't know of any badly programmed games, but like some examples that I think of a non-programmer making a very good game, that happens quite often. So like Dusk from New Blood Interactive, developers will directly say in podcasts and in interviews that they did not know what they were doing. They just made it work. But it worked. They've moved thousands and thousands of units, and no one really cares if the underlying code was suboptimal, because it was a fun game. The same thing goes for like visual novels, that you don't need to be a programmer to put the game together. I recently played Valhalla, Cyberpunk Bartending Simulator. Great game, great stories, great characters. It's not programmatically complex, but it doesn't need to be. So it's about making the product as people enjoy it, even if it's not a very complicated piece of software. So it's hard to answer, because for one, trade secrets, and two, if the game is fun and has reached the consumer, it ultimately doesn't matter if the code was efficient or not. It just needs to be playable.
Yeah, playable and enjoyed. Okay, awesome. And then how about you, Nick?
I think that, like, in this current era, being able to deploy patches and update your game if there's a big flaw, like I think a recent maybe technical example that comes to mind. Maybe you remember, Brian, what the title is. Like there was like a first-person shooter game, like a AAA title that came out where they had the movement of the character based on frame rate rather than like a more mathematically or time-based movement system, where a more beefy machine would have your character moving much faster versus another game. I forget the title, but
I
like
know the one you're talking about, but I forget the title.
but they ended up fixing it. But like that was an example where a technical issue did impact gameplay. I think they did fix it in the end, but it was a thing for a while.
Yeah. And then what makes game development different from other types of big projects when it comes to balancing computer science and the UX or front end design work?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, how interdisciplinary game development is part of why I love it, because I don't just work with engineers, I work with creatives, and I think it's good for more technical-minded people to work with creatives and vice versa. I do a lot of work with, like, for my personal game development company, we have a UI UX person, and her background is not in game development, but we can speak a common language because of my background in web development. So we understand each other to some extent. But that's the thing, is that for software developers, for computer scientists to contribute in a game development environment, they generally need to let go of a lot of the preconceived notion that everyone is going to understand your technical language, everyone will understand version control, everyone will understand the issues with deployment and builds and whatnot, because that's ultimately not their job. Like, I fully believe in letting people do what they're good at and not force them to do other things that are not their job. And so that's one of the challenges and rewarding parts of game development, is that you need to have a team of people that communicate well, as you would with any team. But especially with how interdisciplinary it is, there needs to be that common language that everyone can speak. And that means not going into meetings doing full tech speak for me. But that also means, like, when I'm working with our UX person, that like I'll explain to her like why we can't have this element be animated for technical reasons. And sometimes that's disappointing to that part of the team, but then there's a good balance to be struck with that to explain why the decisions are made from a technical level. Just as if I ask, hey, can we have this big vine animate across the screen when this happens? And they're like, well, we can't animate that in that amount of time. And so it's a give and take. But yeah, letting people focus on what they're good at, but then having a common language is something that I think a lot of traditional software development just doesn't have, because you have nothing but engineers. But game development, you have a bunch of people with broad skill sets. They're all coming together to make the same thing, but need to settle on some common language, common ground rules for how development works. And at the end of the day, everyone learns something. I'm not a 3D modeler, but I've learned a lot about 3D modeling just by working with our 3D modeling team, for example.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I completely agree with Brian. Like one of the things that we sort of embed in our program in media arts and game development is having students that might be focused in art work with students that are focused on the technical side of things. One of the benefits is they're making games together, but learning to communicate is probably one of the biggest features of that, so that they can learn a little bit about which each other's language is and be able to communicate their goals together. And then also it's sort of interesting how different creative U-turns or right turns in their process might emerge in their games, because just because you're a programmer or just because you're a 3D modeler doesn't mean you necessarily in the design phase just have to stick in that lane. You could maybe decide like this is an opportunity for us to come up with something that doesn't exist in the game, and then implement that on both sides.
Awesome. And then you both have a background in working with artificial intelligence. How is AI continually being integrated in game development? Like, how is it affecting user interface, for example?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different schools of thought regarding AI in video games. There's what we call good old-fashioned AI, which has been in video games for as long as video games have been around. Having the opponent paddle and pong, move up and down, is still artificial intelligence by definition. But nowadays that takes on more of the role, and I imagine the source of the question is more related to generative AI, machine learning. I mean, on one hand, it has never been a better time to be good at what you do. If you have a lot of skills and you're able to use this technology to save yourself time and get rid of busy work, that's great. And this comes in all forms. For programming, that's a lot of boilerplate code that it's the same thing over and over again. We can automate that generation to some degree. For anything that's like technical art, like content-aware fill and Photoshop, and like all these tools are available. But the tricky thing is when it starts to replace people, that's where you'll run into a lot of roadblocks in game development, because really it's never going to replace that member of the team, like we were talking about with communication. It's not going to be able to contribute. It won't be able to get rid of the group meeting where we talk about what's viable and what's not. Generative AI today tends to be confidently incorrect quite a bit. And when people use that as a replacement for a team member or for learning a skill themselves, that really hurts, especially given the interdisciplinary nature of game development, that even if you're not a 3D modeler, even if you're not an audio engineer, even if you're not a programmer, you need to be able to understand what they do to a certain extent, and having an AI replace that would be harmful for the team. But like I said, it's still this is the best time ever in history to be good at what you do, because like for our team, we're generally fairly anti-generative AI for our workflow, but this doesn't mean that it's not a part of what we do, because there's no way to get around it. Like I said, content-aware fill is in Photoshop still AI. My autocomplete in Visual Studio is AI. Is this generative and replacing any existing person? No. But is it supplementing what people do? Yes. Do we make sure that we check it? Absolutely. So it's a good time to be skilled, but at the same time, it is a frightening time for people that are just trying to break in and maybe don't have the years of experience beforehand, or worst case scenario, are reliant on that technology to replace what should have been a broad and diverse skill set.
Yeah. So then, do you believe that that no part could be AI automated? Just straight up.
I believe you could automate a lot of game development if you wanted to create games that have been seen before, content that has been done before. I'll generally refer to modern large language models like ChatGPT and Gemini and all those. They're like a digital parakeet. They're very good at repeating what they have seen before, but it's not actual thought. It's not actual process. There's no form to it. And so in a creative field like game development, that's usually not viable, unless you are just trying to clone something one for one that already exists. And even then, you're missing a lot of the nuance to development. So yes, I think it could automate quite a bit. I don't think that many people would be interested in playing a lot of what it would come up with. But that's a whole discussion in and of itself about creating AI content for AI users to consume, to bump up numbers, and problems with modern algorithms and the disparity between human users and fake users. But just it focused on game development, yes, it could automate quite a bit, but I don't think that that's its job. It is a tool like any other, no different than Microsoft Word is for authors. It's just a tool. It should be used as a tool. If it becomes a member of the team, that's something that I think would cause problems for any long-term ability to learn and grow as a developer.
Yeah. Awesome. Nick, what are your thoughts on AI being integrated in game development?
Mine are very similar to Brian's. I think that you should always be aware that AI is going to spit out the things that it's seen before and likely not come up with something novel. And in the creative field like game development, if your goal is to come up with something new or creative, then you should limit it to helping you autocomplete the thing that has been done a million times, and not expect it to come up with something new or ultimately creative. Leave it to the humans, please.
I agree. And then what are the biggest challenges when designing something where multiple people are interacting with it at the same time?
Interacting with the project.
Yes.
So a lot of times that has to do with version control, with making a large-scale software project, which ultimately is what a video game is. It's just a very interdisciplinary software project. That usually means for computer scientists that are very used to working with tools like Git and GitHub and different version control software, it's second nature to us because we have to use it as a tool to trade. But what we've done for my company is we break it down as simple as we can for people that might not have experience with it. And then over time they learn. Just like any tool, like I don't believe that non-programmers are incapable of learning programmer tools. Just as a programmer, I've learned how to use, to a certain degree, Photoshop and Blender and Maya because I've had to. Version control software is no different. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges from a technical perspective of working on a game with really any more than one person to make sure that everyone's stuff is all in one place. But then there's the interpersonal problem as well, making sure that you have good channels of communication, that people know what everyone is working on. And I think software engineering as a background can help with that because it is just project management at the end of the day. But also making sure that whatever workflows people are comfortable with, they get to keep doing. There's nothing worse than being told that you can't work the way that you're comfortable. So integrating people's personal preferences into the pipeline while still having a coherent set of rules for everyone to follow is difficult. But that's where backgrounds in either project management or software engineering really does help drive that process forward. Let everyone do what they're good at. Learn a couple of technical tools, probably, but ultimately for the best to keep everyone in sync and contributing to the project the way that they're comfortable doing it.
Yeah. How about you, Nick?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course, of course. What are the biggest challenges when designing something where multiple people are interacting at the same time?
I think similar to what Brian was saying, like just getting a whole group of people to be moving closely together in step or as one, and making sure that everyone's on the same page. We have a number of classes in the media arts and game development program that help students either work in small groups or in large groups, and because the dynamics might be different, right? You might have to wear many hats in small groups, and in larger groups you might have to have a singular job, and realizing what the expectations are for yourself, or if you have to help with somebody else, and then ultimately being able to communicate across those roles is super important.
Awesome. And then, Nick, since you have an expertise in music, audio, digital media, how has your background shaped the way you design systems that involve interaction, or just designing systems in general?
I think that if there's any hook to this, I think that oftentimes in game development, just maybe from our program, maybe is thinking about sound. I find that it is not thought about early enough in the process. And just like any other sense, sound and music is something that enhances the experience and could be addressed as early as what does the character look like. And you can start talking about how the music and the audio will enhance the experience of a game.
When it comes to, like, how I think about it, when it comes to sound seem kind of specializing in sound, that seems like a niche thing for game development. I guess why did you go into sound? Because you said sound should be thought about early on, like designing the character.
As early as
As
designing,
early
yeah.
as
So like as soon as you start thinking about something that's creative or something that's gonna be impactful to the game, I think about sound and music as equally as impactful, and because you can enhance not only the effects that are happening on the scene, the things that your character immediately might be doing, or you could be foreshadowing something that is not apparent. Like you might walk into a hallway and you can make it feel more eerie, or you can have something that's making a sound that you eventually run into, right? Or you can convey what the character's feeling, what the overall story might be leaning towards. Maybe that there's a something awesome that's about to happen, or something tragic that impacts the outcome of the game, and you can hint at that and be really obvious, or you can be a little more subtle. There's many different layers. You can use sound, you can use sound effects. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And then Brian, what are the core computer science concepts that you always see show up most when building AI-driven game systems?
So for artificial intelligence, like I said, good old-fashioned AI. Algorithms like the A-star algorithm are necessary for things like pathfinding. This is not generative. It's hardly, it's not machine learning. Just regular artificial intelligence is probably the most important by far, because that's used for everything from controlling non-player character movement and interactions, to things like creating an environment with procedural generation. And that's just all more traditional AI algorithms. I don't see a lot of applications for implementing any large language models or generative AI into video games, like in runnable content. Several games have tried to do like LLM generated NPC dialogue for an RPG. It doesn't work because you have no way of putting guardrails on what it does and doesn't do. All of a sudden, a dwarf in some high fantasy setting is talking about cell phones and cars, and you can't really stop it. There was I forget the name of the RPG that attempted to do it, but they a player just asked for the solution to a riddle, and it just gave them the solution and then commended them for solving the riddle, which either in a very meta context is very funny, or in a game development point of view, very sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, good old-fashioned AI, and that boils down to strong mathematical background and data structures, which are things that a lot of folks coming out of computer science want to avoid related to game development. But at the end of the day, understanding how data is structured, how algorithms compare to one another, and what the right tool for the job is, if that's AI, if that's just generally programming core systems of the game, it's just data structures and algorithms, and we just express it in a more creative way in game development than perhaps elsewhere in computer science.
Awesome. And then for this next session, we're going to be talking about advice for students. So you guys did talk a little bit about it, but if a student wants to get into game development, into the industry, would you guys advise them to learn both? Or is it better to focus on one and be very proficient in that area?
I think it's best to focus on what an individual student is passionate about. No one should feel forced to be a jack of all trades. That doesn't mean being ignorant of other facets of game development, but like for me personally, my what called me to game development was programming for it. So I focused on computer science, just as I know folks that are called to it for other creative aspects. This is part of why, like for our curriculum here, we generally have people do a little bit of everything. That even like if you want to go into 3D animation through media arts and game development, you're still probably going to end up taking a programming class, even if it's just, introductory level, just to be able to speak the same language. And then vice versa, folks that have the technical side of MAGD are going to still take drawing classes and like Photoshop, Illustrator courses, so they have a good background. But I wouldn't say that anyone should feel pressured to do jack of all trades, nor should they feel pressured to pick a lane immediately, because not everyone knows that right away. But what I tell any student, regardless of if it's game development or not, is choose whatever it is that you're passionate about and do that. You don't want to spend decades of your life working a job you don't like. If it feels like work, it's probably not something you want to be doing. You want to work on something that you want to put in your own time, your own effort outside of the classroom in. And that's where things like the MAGD Expo are great, because you get to see what students have been working on all year, sometimes of their own volition. And that can be anything. So as far as what students should focus on, it's whatever they find and derive joy from in game development, whatever that might be. And if they don't know it right away, that's fine. We have a broad curriculum for a reason. But then you start asking the question, like, if it's years in and you're like, I haven't found, like, game programming doesn't do it for me, sound design doesn't do it for me, 3D modeling doesn't do it for me, then it's a question of, like, well, can we parlay that into maybe a different skill set, because maybe game development wasn't what you thought it would be. But that's where it's good to have that wide array of knowledge, because then you can focus on, like, maybe all along that student really just wanted to do cybersecurity. They liked some parts of programming, they liked the creative problem-solving nature, but they just didn't like applying it to games. And what's equally important to telling somebody to pursue some field is when to say, maybe this isn't what you're passionate about. But at the same time, game development is a very, very, very broad area. So a lot of people find some joy in it in some way, but finding that requires trying a little bit of everything. So focus on what people are passionate about, but also have a well-rounded background. Otherwise, you can't communicate with other people that don't speak your specific language.
Yeah. And then how about you, Nate? Do you sort of see the same view on that?
Yes, I do. Brian stole all my talking
Yeah.
points.
We should let Nick answer the first
No,
next
no.
time.
I think definitely find out what interests you and that passion about game development, what aspect of it, and try to focus in on that as much as possible. Getting in the game industry is really tough, and that as a student, that's going to require doing extra work, not just the assignments that you might have in certain classes. Like those projects that you do with your friends outside of class are the ones that oftentimes we see. Those passion projects are the ones that end up being much better, and you can show off to other people. Those are the items that you're going to put in your portfolio and carry with you to show off to other people. And yeah.
And then for you both, rather than traditional papers or whatnot, you prefer hands-on projects. What are these student projects that really surprise you? And this could be like non-game development related. But
I'm going to let Nick answer first,
Oh,
so I
man,
don't
now you
steal
gotta
his
make me
ideas
think.
this time.
Oftentimes it's those ones that students have, like, that are not assignments. Those are the ones that they maybe are diving into some concept that we might have touched on in class, we might not have, and maybe it's some examples are some multiplayer games that students have just, like, come out of the blue, and they would be like, hey, professor, can you look at this thing I've been working on? And I check it out. It's they are exploring new ideas or adapting things that have just recently come out. They saw something that maybe a well-known game has implemented, but they have a twist to it. So it's taking something that they have made that maybe they've seen, and they're making it their own in a certain level, taking that extra layer of creativity to it. And those are the ones that I feel like those passion projects that really stand out to me.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think a lot of where I see the most creativity come out of students is for projects at the MAGD Expo, and also projects coming out of game jams, the 48-hour window to make something from nothing. I think restrictions breed creativity, because game jams often have a central theme or a restriction or a set of restrictions. I think that really helps people get better at what they do, even if the restriction is completely fake. Like, you don't need to follow it. Like last year for the Global Game Jam, there was they call it a diversifier, an optional restriction you can put on yourself that said none of the models in your project can have more than 256 triangles. And that was a lot of fun. I liked seeing the games that came out of that because we're not used to working with those restrictions at the time 2025. But yeah, a lot of student projects that do game jams, or like Nick said, of their own volition outside of the classroom, because that's where people actually have passion for something, not just I'm doing this because I was assigned.
Yeah.
And frankly, any industry person that's looking to hire someone, they don't really care what you did in class because everyone did that. Everyone with your degree was assigned, if not the same, a similar project, a similar homework assignment.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say that this is something that I made on my own, especially if it's, some, like Nick said, emerging technology or copying or paying tribute to some existing game to say I can make this too, that goes a lot farther than just I did this for homework, and that makes a much stronger portfolio. So yeah, anything outside of the classroom is what generally impresses me the most, and especially if it's with either some, like if I've had some working with esoteric programming languages, like non-traditional development environments, making a game out of something that is not supposed to be used to make a game, or more advanced features or considerations that we wouldn't normally cover in the standard curriculum. Independent studies, game jams, personal projects, undergrad research. Those are all great avenues for doing things that set somebody apart from the rest of their peers.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's a really good point, and it's something transferable. I'm very interested in marketing, and marketing is one of those fields where employers would really love to see your passion and drive for it. And so I have passion projects on the side, like running my own pages, helping with paid advertising of like local businesses, stuff that isn't assignment related. And those turn out to give me the most opportunities because employers were able to see that I have passion outside of school to pursue these things. And so it's just something nice that you pointed out that I can also relate to. And then for the closing remarks, we're already at the end. What's one thing you wish you knew early on in your career? And we could start with Nick.
Oh man, everything. I think the things I didn't know. Early on, when I was in school, and I was in school for a very long time, in my opinion, I had the attitude of, this is a saying I would say to myself. It's like you can't tell me what to do, or like no one tells me what to do. That was sort of my attitude, and that allowed me to like look into things when I was sort of like shut down by one person or another. I think that something that I would say to my younger self is like, yes, keep doing that. If something is interesting to you, go chase that, because you don't really, the end of that path is not apparent. And don't be afraid to go look at that for a while. And maybe it doesn't really lead anywhere, but there are definitely things that you can carry along with you in the next direction that you go.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, looking back at my time in college, like I really wish that I would have gotten involved with, I'll say, my communities earlier on. I went to Whitewater for my undergrad and I had a great time here, but I really only got involved with the game development student org because one of the founding members almost literally dragged me to a meeting. He was much bigger than me, and so I'm like, okay, yeah, fine, I'll go. And I really enjoyed it, but I didn't feel at the time like I would have gained anything from going. Like I was very interested in just sitting at home, learning on my own, because that's how I had done it for about 10 years before going to college. I really wish I didn't have that mentality. I wish I would have gotten more involved earlier on and done more while I was in college. Just because I think what a lot of folks realize once they graduate is that it's very hard to find community once you leave this space. If you are interested in game development, that's great. There are plenty of people here that share that passion, instructors, other students, student orgs. But then once you graduate, it's not that easy. One of my best friends out of college, somebody that I met from Gamed, he moved out to Massachusetts after graduation, and he was telling me, I cannot find a place to do the Global Game Jam. No one here seems to know what that is. He found one place that he had to drive for a couple of hours to get to, and it wasn't convenient, and it was very hard for him to find that game development community out there. And so what I tell a lot of my students now is like, get involved with this, make these connections now, because no one can take that community away from you once you graduate. You know who your people are. You know who's interested in the stuff that you are. And so even if at first you're like, I don't want to do the social club thing, because believe me, I get it. Despite my work Sona, I'm a massive introvert. I didn't want to go out and do things with people, but I'm glad I did, because a lot of the people that I met from those student orgs I now work with to do professional game development, or are just people that I made as friends for life. So get involved with student orgs. If there isn't a student org that does what you want, make one, because chances are other people are interested in it too. And then be involved with it, do projects with it, go to the optional events. Like for MAGD, do the MAGD Expo, go to MGC and MDev, the industry events, go to any of the visiting artist exhibitions, because once you graduate, those opportunities are really hard to come by. So appreciate them while you can, build that community while you can, and then no one can take that away from you once you graduate.
Awesome. These are all amazing advice. Well, everyone, these have been your guests, Brian Maresso and Nick Hwang. Sorry if I butchered those. But how can people get a hold of you? Contact info, anything?
Yeah, they can email me. I think through the university, you can find me on the faculty directory. Yep.
Yeah.
Email me anytime.
Yeah, exact same thing for me. University email is the best way to get a hold of me. I think it's the case for a lot of folks in MAGD and computer science. And because we're small departments, we like it when people cold call us about being interested in something. That makes our day. So do reach out to us.
Okay, awesome. I'll see you all in the next Creating Connections podcast episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks.